Well, it's a great honour to have the great Carl Bernstein join us. Well, Carl, good morning to you. I know it's very early morning for you over there. Great to talk to you again. Interviewed you many times over the years. Want to talk to you, really, I think, off the top, about the parallels between what is happening now with President Trump and what happened with President Nixon. You are literally the best man to ask. What do you think the parallels are that we can draw?
I think the parallels we can draw are presidents who abuse their power, abuse their authority. But I think the situation with Donald Trump is far worse than Watergate because, one, the American system, American democracy, our institutions worked in Watergate. The president was held accountable. Donald Trump has not been held accountable, and his offenses are grievous. All you have to do now is look at his handling of the pandemic. Look at the story that I've done about his calls with foreign leaders, where he abuses your former prime minister, the chancellor of Germany, near sadistic in terms of how he talks to these women leaders, and then approaches Putin and Erdogan, strongmen, and MBS in Saudi Arabia, seeking their approval, toadying up to them, selling out to some extent the interests of the United States in the West, while at the same time going after our own allies and allowing Putin to destabilize the West. And you see it in these phone calls, but really with President Trump, the system has not worked. And we also have the case of his instability. We have the case of those closest to him who are extremely worried about whether or not he has the ability to conduct the presidency of the United States.
Well, Carl Bernstein, I just wonder if I can interrupt to ask you specifically about this, because it's this story that you've written of these hundreds of phone calls with foreign leaders that illustrates President Trump's way of operating on the international stage. And you've said that they show that he's so woefully underprepared that he himself poses a threat to national security. And I wonder whether that is because he has a malign intent when it comes to foreign affairs, or whether he is just purely ignorant of foreign strategy.
Susanna, let's back up a little bit, because what the story says, it's not me saying that he's unfit or a danger to the national security of the United States. Far more important, the president's own former national security advisors, former Secretary of State, former heads of intelligence, former White House chiefs of staff, all concluded that the president of the United States himself, as evidenced in these phone calls, is a danger to the national security of the United States. This is unique in our history. You could not have said that about Richard Nixon.
But is that because he is bad or because he is ignorant?
First of all, I think we don't know the answer to that question. What we do know, for instance, let's look at the question of whether he is witting, half-witting, or unwitting in terms of allowing Putin to accomplish the kind of destabilization of the United States and the West that he's been able to do during the Trump presidency. I don't know the answer to your question. I'm neither a psychiatrist, and the best evidence we have about Trump's state of mind, perhaps, are his own tweets, his own public statements, his own conduct. So I really can't go to the definitive answer of that.
What is extraordinary?
Let me just finish this point to Susanna, that the question of his ignorance is a real one, because he is ignorant of history in a way that no American president has ever been. His misstatements of fact and lies are well known and actually define both him and his presidency. But what we are dealing with here is a president of the United States who, in the third year of his presidency, is regarded by those who serve closest with him in national security areas as unfit to be president of the United States on all of the grounds that we're talking about here, in terms of his ignorance, in terms of whether he's witting or unwitting or half-witting, in allowing Putin to do what he has accomplished, in allowing Erdogan, for instance, in Turkey to convince, and at the behest of Putin as well, to convince Trump that the United States should withdraw its troops from Syria so that the Kurds, our allies, would be open to slaughter by Erdogan's
What is
forces.
extraordinary, Carl, if I could jump in, it's just the...
And that's on the phone calls.
Yeah.
Right. And they're very damning and they're very disturbing reading. There's no question. What is extraordinary is here we are, we're in July, we're 4 months before the next election. We've had 40 million job losses in 3 months, some being clawed back, but devastating. The economy tanking like we haven't seen it in 100 years. 3 million cases of coronavirus in America now with 130,000 deaths. Terrible racial tension following the murder of George Floyd and all the protests. And at every step of the way, President Trump has managed to make things even worse. And you would imagine under any normal situation that a president who had presided over such catastrophe and made things worse would not have a cat-in-hell's chance of being re-elected. And yet with Donald Trump, the normal rules don't really apply. And it could be that despite everything, Carl, that we wake up on November the 4th, I think it is, and he's still in the White House.
Well, it's certainly possible. I think you have to look at this is not just about Donald Trump. This is about our country and our people. Donald Trump has commanded the allegiance of perhaps 40% of our electorate through his presidency, despite all the outrages, despite the acts of demonstrable incompetence, despite the fact that he is a racist in terms of both his words and his acts. This is an extraordinary situation. But we've had a cold civil war in this country that's been going on for 25, 30 years. And Donald Trump, I think, understood that cold civil war and he's exploited it. But he's now been willing to bring that cold civil war to the point of ignition in terms of his provocations to throw fuel on the fire in such a way to gain re-election that he is willing to see this country to some extent go up in flames on the streets if he thinks that it would help his re-election.
How is the media, do you think, handled Trump from the moment he became a candidate through to his presidency? You know, looking at it from the outside, if I was being critical of the media, I'd say they've almost fallen into his deliberate trap, which is to make the news cycle 24/7 about Donald Trump. You know, he's told me himself that he would wake up in the White House, turn on the televisions, which he has, and if he didn't like what he was seeing, pull out his phone, do an incendiary tweet and watch them all change in real time and watch the news cycle move where he wanted it to move.
He's the arch manipulator.
Has he been, you know, basically like a puppeteer with the media, and have the media collectively in their need to, because they know he gets ratings and makes a lot of money for the media, has it been a sort of mutually abusive relationship which has not served the American people well?
Too simple. I do think that the media, particularly the cable news networks during the campaign, gave Donald Trump all too much free airtime, such as a candidate had never received because of theatrical aspects of his performances, and it helped him win the presidency. But I think that the cable news networks quickly learned their lesson and have not done that since. Look, the President of the United States is rightfully a huge story, what he says and what he does. Are there occasions when we fall into his traps? Yes. But let me talk about the tweets. The tweets are really the best roadmap of Donald Trump's mind that we have. That's real news. We need a roadmap of his mind. The fact that 40% of the people of this country continue to support him after we have seen that roadmap and how ugly that roadmap is, that is a question about the United States and our people, not just about Donald Trump. In terms of daily reporting, Donald Trump has been covered, I think, the best White House coverage of my lifetime on a daily basis by the major news institutions we have seen in the Trump presidency. Most of what we know about Donald Trump, his outrages, his lack of competence, his secret activities in terms of how he is, these phone calls or whatever aspect of his presidency we have uncovered, the fact that Republicans in Congress have enabled this president to do the things he's done. The Republican Party is totally at his beck and call. What it shows,
Carl, what it seems to be is that the kind of tribalism, which is now being fueled by social media, which obviously wasn't around in the Nixon era. The social media has fueled these kind of echo chambers, this tribalism, extreme partisanship, and it's fueled all day long into this kind of cacophony of tribalism that it's made, I would say, regular political judgment almost impossible, where the Senate just goes with everything Trump does. He could almost do, well, like he said, he could walk down Fifth Avenue and shoot someone, and it probably wouldn't make any difference.
I don't think that's because of social media. Social media is certainly a factor that Trump has been able to exploit. There's no question that he is the beneficiary of social media, particularly mistruths, misinformation, disinformation, outrageous untruths on social media. We live in a world in which social media is a way to disseminate any kind of information without any checks.
Do you tweet, Carl?
Et cetera. I do, not often, but I do occasionally, yes. That's the answer. People can go to my Twitter account and take a look at what's up there.
I have to say, Carl, I've taken a step back from tweeting because I find that the response now, it's like a permanent headache. Twitter actually is not a particularly pleasant place to go. But I just want to ask you...
I doubt that I've put up more than 150 tweets in my life. But,
right. Well, even one can generate a reaction.
Don't hold me to it. I don't know the
Carl,
number.
what do you make of a couple of things? Firstly, that Trump supporters just don't care enough. They love the way he operates. They love the fact that he's personality driven, that he thinks he can be the big man on the world stage and appeal to these other big men and get what he wants. They love the fact that he still goes out and plays golf even in the middle of a crisis, that they just don't care about all the criticism. And also, is Joe Biden the person who can harness the people who do care, including all the people who might have worked with Trump who think he poses a threat? Can Joe Biden get them to coalesce around him to defeat Trump?
Well, we don't know. We have to see how this campaign goes. I'm pretty bad at predicting elections, though actually I did think Trump was going to win for most of the campaign. And I changed my mind in the last 5 days and thought Hillary Clinton would win it finally because of looking at the polls of both the Trump organization and the Democrats. But whatever the case, I think you got to be very careful about making broad statements about the people who support Trump. Some people support Trump with some good reason. The same stands were taken by Trump and Bernie Sanders, for instance, on trade and the way we've been taken advantage of. It doesn't mean that there's anything to justify the kind of trade wars that Trump has initiated and the tariffs, et cetera, et cetera. But it's more complicated than that. We are a complicated people. This is a complicated country. And not all people who voted for Trump are ignorant or evil or anything of the kind. He has captured the imagination of all kinds of people. That said, there are also in his base a very large number of people who harbor terrible racist feelings and express them, that it's basic to their being, but it's also basic to the being of this president of the United States. And there's a long history of racism in our country, and to pretend that it is disappearing is to close our eyes. And Trump, in fact, has made it possible again for racism not only to flourish, but to achieve a kind of respectability among a certain element of our population.
Carl, I want to try and, we're just running out of time now. I want to try and just end on a happier note, because a lot of negative stuff flying around, as we know. You're one of the great journalists.
Well, why don't we end on why you did that Johnny Depp segment? After saying all those things, you could have not put it on your air.
Well, you know what? It's a very good point. It's a very good point. I almost feel that about
journalism.
Well, in a way, I feel it's a bit like the Trump thing. Is that sometimes the best thing might be just to actually not air some of the stuff. But and I do feel that about the Johnny Depp thing, actually. But
well, I think you're right about Trump in the instance, for instance, of some of his, and we ought to be doing live coverage of his events, of his campaign rallies, and usually we do not anymore. That's something different.
Yeah, let me just try and end on, like I said, a positive note. You're one of the great journalists of modern times, immortalised by Dustin Hoffman, played you in a movie. It doesn't get any better of a journalist. What is your advice for young journalists setting out in the business now who are watching this and thinking, wow, that's Carl Bernstein? What is your advice for young journalists? What do you tell them these days?
Two things. Same thing. And Bob Woodward and I have been consistent about what we say. And that is, what is good reporting? It's the best obtainable version of the truth.